Is apometry the same as spiritism? That's a good question and wonderful question. This question will be answered by Dr. Costa. Victor Ronaldo Costa. Dr. Costa. Dr. Costa is a very experienced guy on this field because he worked for a long time as a conventional medical doctor and as a spiritual doctor and one of the researchers of apometry. So let's talk a little bit about him before he answers the question, because it is done already. I just took it in order to give it to you. Dr. Costa is one of those who joined the team of Dr. Lacerda, the father of apometry, on mid-70s, 1970s, and worked side by side with Dr. Lacerda for more than 10 years. Dr. Lacerda, the father of apometry, is the one who created, on 1965, the great team of systematic studies and scientific research to establish apometry. Dr. Costa worked side by side with him. So he made this great team starting on 1965 with systematic studies and scientific research. It was not one day. It was done on Porto Alegre, the capital of Rio Grande do Sul, South Brazil, from 1965 through the 90s, when Dr. Lacerda presented the world with his 2 books. So, his first book, the name is Spirit and Matter. It has been translated. The first book, Spirit and Matter, which is a book where, which integrates the contemporary Western medicine with the ancient and modern spiritual practices. That's what you will find on his book specifically, other than the other things he talks about on the book. The second book of Dr. Lacerda is Energy and Spirit, a wonderful book. And in that book, it is the theory and practice of apometry. So, on 1990s, Dr. Lacerda presented the world with his 2 books and many conferences and many meetings around to show it. But it was 25 years after. So Dr. Costa and Dr. Lacerda worked in the same hospital as medical doctor in a conventional way of healing, medicine way of healing, and they also worked as researchers of apometry, working as spiritual doctors. After that, Dr. Costa, who will answer the question, he went to Brasilia to serve as a medical doctor on the conventional way and as a spiritual doctor. He helped many people in Brasilia, the capital of Brazil, using the ways of apometry when the person accepted. So in 1993, Dr. Costa was president of what? The Medical Spiritual Association of Brasilia, the capital of Brazil. There are many doctors, medical doctors, who are also spiritual doctors, working both ways. So, he also presented, Dr. Costa also presented the world with his 3 books. And let's see, the first book is This Obsession and Apometry. This Obsession and Apometry is an analysis in the light of the spiritual science. A great book. He analyzes apometry in the site of spiritual science. The other book is Apometry, The New Horizons of Medicine. Great for doctors. And the other book is Mediumship and Medicine. It talks about the syndromes of mediumship and the meaning and everything that goes with that. So this guy is an authority when it comes to this subject, because he has experience with that on both ways. Now, he is also, he has been since then, he has been also a lecturer on the subject of apometry around Brazil. He goes everywhere. He goes to wherever he is invited, or he has his own schedule to talk about that with experience, because he has experience on that. So one thing is, who is being in there studying without stopping, working the case, watching, observing everything, and tells you about something. The other thing is when somebody who has not done that feel in the right to talk about apometry without knowledge. So when you go to the internet, you just be a little bit careful of where the source comes from. Let's go back to the question. Is apometry the same as spiritism? He says, Dr. Costa says, it depends on the way it is analyzed. So what he does in order to answer the question, he will go to different point of views to talk about spiritism and to talk about apometry and put together. He says, spiritism is a science because it is a science because it explains the nature of the spirits, the origin of the spirits, the destination of the spirits, and their relationship with the physical world. That's the spirit science. It is a science because it proves always with the observation and with everything. It proves the nature of the spirits, the origin, the destination, and the relationship. Okay, he goes on. As a science, he says, spiritism is not an academic science. It is a science of observation. As a science, spiritism explains the spiritual reality around us and involving us. The academic science works with material investigation, and the spiritual science works with observation. So, the academic science works with material investigation that manifests within the universe of mathematics. And the spiritual science works with the observation. What happens around us and involving us, and all the other things. The nature, the origin, the destination, and the relationship, and what is around and what involves. Okay, and he goes on. The father of the Spiritism, Allan Kardec, who is the author of the Spirit book, stated that the science itself has no jurisdiction over the question of the spirit. It is in there, in the book of the father of the Spiritism. For the spirit science is ethereal. and works with the observation between, around us and involving us. The academic science works with material investigation and mathematic proofs. Spiritism is also a doctrine, considering the word doctrine as a set of principles that work as basis of a system, religious system, political system, educational system, philosophical system. So the word doctrine can be that, a set of principles that work as basis of a system. So he goes on and says, in that sense of the word, Spiritism is a comprehensive and evolved doctrine because it holds and teaches a set of philosophical principles on moral basis. And he goes on. However, Spiritism as a doctrine or a set of philosophical principles on a moral basis has nothing to do with other religions. There are often beset on dogmas, beset with dogmas, with external practices, and with blind obedience to the infallible pontiffs. That's the word he says. It is a doctrine, but not that kind of doctrine with blind beliefs, with beliefs and blind obedience. It doesn't happen to the world of Spiritism. It is something else. And he goes on, as Spiritism, as a philosophical doctrine, it comprises all the moral consequences concerning the relationship between us, human beings, and the discarnate spirits. So in that sense, it is philosophical doctrine. So everything is based on the consequences of our own faults or our own virtues. Yes. Spiritism, and another analysis, he says, the spirit science, by working with the mediums already trained, and with the properties of human magnetism, spirit science working with the mediums trained, and the properties of human magnetism, it reveals the reality of an extra-physical dimension and unfolds the new horizon to the whole and integrated medicine. So he says now, apometry consists of a set of magnetic techniques over the mediums who are already trained in the task. So it is a set of magnetic techniques over the mediums. The mediums are induced with a kind of artificial somnambulism, so that to interact them easily and directly with the discarnate spirits, with the world of discarnate spirits. So in that way, the mediums can recognize the mentors, identify the perispirit of the patient, identify complex pathologies of the spirit or of the patient. The mediums can find spirits obsessors, spiritual enemies of that patient, if it is the case, find the reasons why they are in there, and find solution for both of them. And also, the mediums can identify the astral scenarios of where they go with details. He analyzed everything, all the subject. Now he goes to answer the question. And the question again, is apometry the same as spiritism? Let's see what he says. We would say then that apometry, yes, is spiritism, yes. And he says more, and he adds, the practice of mediumship with discipline, the fluidotherapy or magnetic pass, the magnetized water, the bioenergy or laying on of hands, the prayers, the healing at a distance, the techniques of apometry should all be considered spiritual activities. And he goes on and says, spiritual activities are all those that involve fraternal and universal love for the transformation of mankind. He's very clear in here. Use it with a good intention and the intention of helping the others, and you will see wonderful things for the transformation of mankind. That's what he's fighting for, the transformation of mankind. Going everywhere to talk about that and teaching the way he can, best way he can to make people understand that or use that. And he says, our experiences with apometry, when he says our, he refers to those who are doing the same as he does. Our experience with apometry has shown along the way that it is an excellent practice of spiritual treatment. Now, please just pay attention to those who say something about that without the ground of experience, just because they think differently, but they don't have grounds for that, or because they discriminate it. How many times great things came to our world and they were discriminated and put down? Why is apometry a comprehensive way of healing? It is a comprehensive way because through the techniques of apometry, one can find the root, the cause of the matter. If a patient complains about something, about some symptoms on her physical body, the patient will describe it, describe the symptoms for a conventional medical doctor. But not always the symptoms are related to what the patient says. And sometimes those symptoms are not found because actually they do not belong to the physical body. And the conventional way of healing goes to the physical body. So, if the problem seems to be on the physical body, but it is a spiritual matter, how come a conventional medical doctor will find? And if the matter is related to a spiritual issue. So that's why apometry is comprehensive. Why is it different? Okay, because apometry is definitely established as an instrument of psychic research. And with the techniques of apometry, one is able to find the right diagnosis of the most complex pathologies of the patient or of the spirit, because the pathologies are in the spirit, in the data of the patient, which means in the spirit or in the soul, in the spiritual body. It also can take the right therapeutic treatment to combat the cause of each particular case. That's why it is different. But apometry is not a miraculous way of treatment. It is only a set of magnetic technique that one can use to approach the human soul. It is a technique to approach the human soul. So one can approach the soul of the patient and try to find the right problem and find the solution. But I mean, and I want to tell you if it is possible. So it is not a kind of game. Sometimes the problem of the patient is in the patient's habits, everyday habits. Like there is something very common, hypochondria. There are patients who want to be sick. It is important for them to tell people how sick they are because they want to make attention. They want to people pity them. They feel themselves victims. So how come just because it is apometry, it will heal something like that? Even God can help you if you don't want to be helped. So one who does that goes around to see if the cause of the problem who is bothering the patient comes from the ego, comes from the conscience of the patient, things that the patient can describe, or if it comes from experiences that are forgotten but are of this present lifetime and are in there bothering the patient, or if the matter is in the other self, collective self of another lifetime or previous lifetime, no matter how far it is or it was, and if the problem has to do with a spiritual issue. So there are many ways to analyze, to research. That's why apometry is an instrument of magnetic psychic research, according to Dr. Costa, Victor Ronaldo Costa, who has experience enough, and it is an authority to say that, because has experience in both ways, like Dr. Lacerda. Through the techniques of apometry, one can search other sources to see if the patient's case has to do with the spiritual matters. And many times it has to do with the spiritual matter. Through the techniques of apometry, one can help both ways. The patient who is asking for help and the spirit who is bothering the patient. Apometry works always on both ways. If the case has to do with the past lifetime, then it will, through the techniques, the operator will set to heal both the patient and the personality. If it has to do with the spirit, the same thing. Through the techniques, one will help the patient physically speaking and the spirit or the spirits or the many spirits that were in connection with the patient for some reason. And other than that, through the techniques of apometry, one will find what is the story behind the scenes pulling the strings. We find the reason or each reason why the problem is taking place and bring everyone to the most powerful way of healing, that means forgiveness. The best way of healing is forgiveness, and that is exactly the way apometry works, forgiveness. So it goes around, that's why it is efficient. It's not only to think about the patient and forget the other, no. It is the patient and whatever is on the other side is bothering, let's bring everyone to a consensus and forgiving one another, because when one asks forgiveness and the other one forgives, that's it. That's it. That's all we need. The problem is over. Then it will take a little time to set everything up. Okay, now, another question. What does the name itself means? What does the name Apometry means? It comes from two Greek words. Apo is one word, Greek word, prefix that means beyond, away from, or to separate. It also means to separate. And metri comes from another Greek word, metron, that means measurement. For example, if the one who is working with apometry feels that should research the past of the patient, this person will use a technique like a jump back. It is based on quantum physics. So it will jump back to see where the case or the root of the problem is. And it means it doesn't go according to the standard way of measurement. So that's the name. Because it can jump ahead to see the future and see what can be done considering the future. It can jump back to see if the case has to do with the far back previous lifetime. So that's why it goes beyond. And metry, because it doesn't consider the standard way of measurement. And on the next program, we will tell you one of the examples from Dr. Costa that he had in his office, and it was done with apometry. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful week, and think about everything I have told you with love in order to transform, in order to have yourself as part of this transformation, knowing thyself, and you will see what you should do. Thank you very much.